Welcome to Teal Talk, a podcast brought to you by the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. That's OAESV for short. We're your hosts, Taylor
and Lori.
In each episode, we speak with professionals in the field to dive deep into the intersectional issues that affect survivors in Ohio.
Before we begin, we want to give a content warning that we will be discussing sexual violence and other issues that may be upsetting and triggering. If you need help, please feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. Please take care of yourself.
Hi, welcome to Teal Talk Youth Ambassador Takeover. Today we're going to be covering some hot topics, including consent beyond fries and man versus bear, which is a very hot trend right now. So my name is Essie. I use she, her pronouns. I am a youth ambassador with Be the One, which is the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence's social media campaign. So I've been really passionate about sex education for a really long time. My mom is a sex educator, and so that just led me to be passionate about prevention education. And a fun fact about me is that my favorite animal is an inchworm.
My name's Willow. I use she, her pronouns as well, and I am also a youth ambassador with Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Before I kind of got involved with Ohio Alliance, I worked a lot with the national nonprofit SafeBay, so I was one of the first fellows in their Summer Activist Institute, and when I came back from that, I changed my school district sexual misconduct policy. So that's kind of my journey through sexual violence prevention, and now we're here. I guess a fun fact about me is that I am indeed named after the tree.
So, hey y'all, I'm Sarah, she, her, they, them pronouns. I am the manager of sexual violence prevention and public health initiatives at the Coalition, Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. And I have been, up until now, running the Be the One social marketing campaign, which has been in different iterations before I came to the coalition for about 8+ years. Right now, it exists in the social media realm. But what we realized is that we were not walking the walk because we were doing a social marketing campaign for teens, but being led by adults. And so, born out of that has been the Youth Ambassador Program, which we are featuring now. And Essie and Willow are part of our inaugural Youth Ambassador Program for 2024. Fun fact about me. Oh gosh, I am a novice urban forager. So I get down with some mushrooms. And so if you ever want some tips and tricks on how to find your own mushrooms, as well as like other plants. So with that, we are really going to jump in. And my role today is simply just going to be to moderate and hang out while Essie and Willow drop some incredible facts, knowledge, and perspectives. So as we're settling in, I would love for you all, with your background and knowledge in sexual violence prevention, to generally give us some definitions of like, what do we mean by prevention?
When I think of prevention, I immediately go to education. I also think that a lot of the times in the sexual violence realm, people think about justice, which is really, really important. But I also think it would be great if we never needed justice, because these things would never happen. And I just feel like it's all about attacking sexual violence per se from the root cause of it, rather than waiting for it to happen. And I also think of it as knowing that we live in a world where sexual violence is a reality. How can we educate people on how to keep themselves safe, and how can we educate people on how to not hurt others? So, Willow, what do you think?
I think what a lot about what prevention means to me is, like, again, education, and education early and deep education. Because education about things like consent doesn't have to just be based on sex. You can teach consent from, like, early ages. It doesn't have to be consent to have sex. It can be consent to give someone a hug, consent to use someone's pencil. So for me, if we were teaching these kinds of principles and concepts from an early age, that's really a lot of what prevention means to me, because there wouldn't be this kind of blurriness between, oh, well, is this consent? What even is consent? So I think that's a big part of what prevention is for me, is education, kind of like you said at the beginning.
Yeah, I've been working with some really young elementary school kids recently at a local elementary school, and like I've just been noticing how much I use the word consent, and like a couple of them have been asking me like what it is. Like I saw one kid give another one a hug really, really tightly the other day, and I was like, "Is that proper consent?" And they were like, "What's consent?" And it was such a good moment for me to be like, well, it's body boundaries. And now they are really passionate, and they made little stick figures and cut them out, and were like having them hug each other without consent and being like, Miss Essie, this is bad. And I was like, I know. And then the little stick figures asked each other, and they would be like, this is good. And I'm like, so beautiful. Like, because I feel like adults often act like it's really complicated. And like just being around these young kids, they understand like it so well. It's amazing.
I think it also scares a lot of adults. I think it scares a lot of parents, especially because when you say, I want to teach your kid about consent, they immediately go to, I want to teach your kid how to have sex, and I want to teach them what sex is and blah, blah, blah. And you're saying this, like, I'm going to teach your 5-year-old about consent. And they're like, that's weird. But it's not weird.
One of the things that I think is really important, like, is teaching kids about the correct words for their body parts too. I think just like that education about your own body can be a really big part of sexual violence prevention, because if we aren't teaching people about how their own bodies work, like how can we expect them to be safe? And I'm not even talking about sexual violence there. Like this can encompass so many things like STIs, for example, or just like knowing risk in like everyday situations. And so in the sexual violence realm, like I think that's really important for that justice aspect too, because if a kid says like their word for vagina instead of vagina, that can't be held up in a court of law. And so like that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about when I teach body boundaries to younger kids. Is like we go over body parts, and I feel like every year they know it better and better. Like I don't think I've had anyone tell me that their vagina is a cookie recently, which is really good because it's not. It's a vagina, and you can say that word.
Yes, I am so glad that you're bringing these different nuances into the conversation, especially around consent and how it's so much more than just sexual activity and like consent for sexual activity. And also, what I'm hearing from you all is that there's developmentally appropriate ways to teach consent from the time somebody is really young. And you can keep teaching that along the way, so that we're reinforcing that education over time. And so I would love to hear from you all about like, when we're talking about consent, we're talking about relationships and sexual violence prevention. What do you think is often missing, especially from like a Gen Z perspective of like how we're teaching sexual violence prevention and even sex education? What, in your perspectives, is missing from the conversation?
Well, I think one really big thing that is missing is that understanding that consent is about more than sex. I just really wish that we could break that down societally, because I think it's really improving in education recently, but I think still in society, when you hear somebody talking about consent and getting consent and like their partner giving them consent, they immediately go to sex. But I also think that when we think about consent in relation to sex, the education is very heteronormative. So I think that when we talk about consent, like directly talking about sex and sexual activity with someone else. I wish that it was more inclusive of all types of relationships. And like, I never hear polyamory talked about in those conversations. Like, it's always get consent from your partner. It's never you need consent from everyone that you are involving yourself with. And it's like, whenever we talk about sexual violence, I feel like I always hear someone talking about a man assaulting a woman. And like, that might be the most common, but like, especially when I hear about sexual violence in relationships, that's all I hear about. And it's like, there's more types of relationships than that. And I think that also people think cis man and cis woman when you talk about that. And we're not talking about the higher risk that Black women have and the higher risk that transgender women carry. And I just think that the conversation needs to be a lot more inclusive. It's just so baffling to me that like we pride ourselves so much on like Gen Z, we're progressive, we're different from those who came before us, we understand things, and it's just like we don't. And I also think that pornography is really normalized, and I definitely don't want to bring any shame into this space because I understand that sexual desires are completely natural, and there's nothing wrong with watching pornography necessarily, but the way that it's made is like, I can only think of it as glorified rape culture unless it's made from like an independent progressive company, and then that costs money, not even always these individuals' faults. It's just that they're being exposed to this because of natural desires and they don't know where else to go, and then it kind of corrupts their own brain.
I think also, like, in the time, like, social media is such a prevalent and such, like, a huge thing that it's just so much easier to say things without as big of consequences that people really just say anything. And I think that really amplifies rape culture a lot because, like, there's campaigns like us that kind of work on social media to dismantle this, but then there's also so many accounts that make it a joke and make it like it's a meme, like that whole man versus bear thing. People are joking about that, even though a lot of women are like really like taking it to like reflect and think deeper about it. A lot of men specifically are getting like offended by it and making jokes, well, like, go date a bear.
What I'm hearing from you all, and you stressed so deeply this understanding of like education is critical for prevention. What I'm also hearing is that even with kind of the progressive education, that there's still a cultural issue. And I'm so interested to hear from you all about, because I think about from my generation, like we had a pendulum swing where in the early aughts, like rape culture was out of control. And then Me Too came along, and, you know, it was a slow burn because we know like Tarana Burke was launching Me Too in the early aughts and we weren't listening. And then it comes back around kind of in the late, 2000 teens. And we had a huge pendulum swing where there was a cultural shift. I mean, at least dominantly. And now we're kind of seeing it swing back again. What do you all think, in addition to education, would really be needed to address this cultural issue of rape culture really coming back in your generation?
I think that it would be really important to kind of break down the taboo around sexual violence because obviously we don't want to normalize sexual violence. That is not what I am saying, but I do think we need to normalize talking about it. Like, someone says like, yeah, I have been sexually assaulted, and the reactions are always so extreme, which is good, but it just shows that we're not talking about this enough. And like the way that we are so normalized to seeing it, like again with pornography, like nobody bats an eye when pornography is violent towards women, but then a woman that you know tells their story and everyone is like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. I'm like, you can't believe it happened, but like it's everywhere. And I think that we need to normalize being willing to do a little bit of some self-advocacy work. Also, just really state like kind of that same Me Too thing I think needs to be happening in everyday life. It's just so troublesome to me that everyone is so surprised when someone shares a sexual assault story, even though a lot of people can relate to that. And I just think that we need to see that it is this common, and we need to be willing to talk about it in a way that we're not right now.
Okay, so I'm so interested in what you all are saying, because what I'm hearing is that there's such an importance of education, but that also your generation is experiencing like really high levels of rape culture, and how that pendulum has kind of swung back after the big Me Too movement. And so I wonder what y'all's thoughts are on like what else might we need to be doing beyond kind of like classroom education to really address the behaviors and values and beliefs that are upholding rape culture?
Yeah, so I think that education really, really, really is key. I think that it needs to be a part of our daily conversations, just like respecting each other's boundaries. And I also think that it's about accountability. I don't know if you guys have seen these, but there are like these like sexual violence prevention devices for like people assigned female at birth. And those really, really make me sad, because I think that we have shifted away from that culture of like, oh, you just need to cover up and it won't happen to you. Or, oh, you just don't need to go out at night and it won't be happening to you. Or, oh, just carry a taser. It won't happen to you. And like those statements that we've so clearly been like, well, those aren't okay, because they pin the responsibility of prevention on the survivor. And we've totally swung in the opposite way. And well, we swung in the opposite way and then we swung in the same way. And we're like making these devices so that people can prevent assault happening to them. And it's just so wrong to me, because it's like it is not the survivor's responsibility to stop it. And I think that we just need to be holding perpetrators accountable for not perpetrating. And I think a lot of that can come from breaking down the patriarchy and toxic masculinity, like not raising boys to think that they need to be powerful over women. And then I think that one final thing that can help is just breaking down these like systems that kind of foster sexual violence. We're supposed to stay like oppressed and, do whatever we're told. And that is harmful to the rates of sexual violence. And so I think that it's about just like breaking down those systems, and also like power dynamics, breaking those down too.
Something else is also bystander intervention. So bystander intervention, just like a brief summary, is when you witness something like a situation that's potentially harmful in some way, and you respond in a way that's going to be positive to the outcome of the situation, and it's going to positively affect the situation. And so I think you bringing bystander intervention into like your daily life. So maybe your friend says something that's contributing to rape culture, not just kind of laughing it off and like maybe staying uncomfortable on the inside with it, but more like outwardly saying, hey, that's not okay. I think really standing up for not only yourself but others is definitely like a big thing that could shut down rape culture really quick, because whenever someone's humbled, they get humbled and then they like shut up. And it kind of like shifts the conversation away from something negative to maybe something more positive. Just for an example, the other day, me and my friend, we put like we're making like our college wish lists and like what we want to get before we go to the college. And we were talking about how we're putting like pepper spray and like new rape alarms on it. And I just thought it was a really good like teaching opportunity, because someone made a joke about it, about how like funny it is, about how women have changed so much, like can't even protect themselves, blah blah blah, that they need like pepper spray. And someone else like stepped in, and it was just a really good learning opportunity, I think. And so not even bystander intervention as like humiliating the person, but teaching them as well, because some people are just genuinely uneducated.
Sometimes these things can be super overwhelming when we think like, oh, we have to do this huge deep dive with people and like really teach them about themselves. But what I'm hearing you say is like something as simple as saying like, hey, that's like not what we do here. That's not what we say here, can be just like a simple way. And it doesn't take a whole lot beyond saying those words, especially if you're feeling like safe to do it. And you've assessed like the safety of yourself and those around you. So I really appreciate y'all reflecting on those things. And this isn't necessarily a hard pivot, but it's related. But I think, diving a little bit deeper into education, especially around consent and like what we're missing in the conversation. I know that you all have discussed and, explored the different ways that consent is taught, especially to younger people. And we're often relying very heavily on Planned Parenthood's FRIES acronym. So just a quick breakdown. FRIES meaning freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. And I wonder what you all think about that framework, what works with it, what are some critiques you have of it, and like what could we be doing a little bit more to teach consent education?
The FRIES model is super good for like one-time consent, but I think it's also really important to mention and kind of understand that consent isn't just a one-time given thing. It's a conversation, whether that be with your partner of a long term or a partner for one night. It's a conversation. It's not just, can we have sex? Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. And it's establishing boundaries. So it's not just that one time yes. It's a continuation and a conversation over time, whether that be weeks and months or a few hours.
FRIES model is really good for people who are not going to sit down with you and talk about how consent really works for 20 minutes. I think it does encompass a lot in like the 10 seconds that it takes to tell it to someone. And I think it's great to put on a poster because it does stick with people. But I do think that in terms of like sex education and stuff, where we're going more in depth, it would be good to go farther than that. I love the F. I love freely given. Consent should always be freely given, 100%. But like reversible, like Willow was saying, consent should be a conversation, and reversible kind of makes it sound like I said yes and I take that back. Whereas it can be like, I wanted to then, but right now I'm wishing we could change it. It's not a yes or no. I feel like the reversible makes it seem so black and white. What do you guys think about reversible?
I definitely agree. I think reversible definitely makes it seem like too extreme when it can be like I said, like an ongoing conversation. Like, oh, I said yes an hour ago, but I'm really not feeling it right now. Like, that's not really necessarily reversing what you said. It's not saying yes at 1 second and then no, I never want to do this ever again with you at a different second. I think it's very narrow where it should be more broad.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of feel like it's like makes it seem like it's either a yes or a no. And I feel like there's so much space in between there that's like maybe or I'm not sure. And I feel like we're taught so much that if it's not a yes, it's a no. But I really don't like that because it's like, and I'm not sure doesn't mean no. It could. It could be someone's way of telling you no, and you never want to be like, you're not sure. All right, let's go ahead. That's not what I'm saying. But somebody saying I'm not sure might be a opportunity to be like, well, what is it that's making you unsure? Like, are you not sure if you want to do this or do you want to do this and you're just nervous? And like, yeah, yeah. I just feel like consent can be so much more beautiful than what we're taught. It can be so like conversation based and it can make you feel so close to someone. And we're just taught if it's not a yes, it's a no. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. Someone tells you no, it is okay to feel disappointed. And it is okay to feel sad, and that does not make you a bad person because let's say that somebody did text you all flirty and was like, yeah, I totally want to do this tonight. And you're excited, and then they get there and they're like, never mind. Totally makes sense to be sad, right? Of course, you're like, oh, that's a bummer. But that doesn't give you the right to hurt someone.
Yeah. I think that fries is good for like a very surface level understanding, but I feel like it always goes deeper. I love fries. It's definitely not a bad little acronym at all. I just think everything goes deeper
Totally. I'm so grateful that you all are bringing so much nuance to the conversation. And I think, especially hearing about like what we might miss in talking about rejection. I know, like, from my experience growing up and even teaching sex ed, so much of what was left out was also like, what happens when you don't, like, when you receive a no? Because I think we're so often talking about yes means yes and enthusiasm and all of these things that can really water consent down in a variety of ways, but especially not talking about like how you feel when you hear a no. Like that is a lot. And we can not be our best selves when we respond, like after hearing a no and being rejected. So I'm just really grateful that you all brought that up. And I think that this really brings us into kind of the second part of our conversation, if we're okay to kind of move and frame this a little bit more deeply, is that Willow, you brought up earlier about kind of the viral discourse that's going around right now about man versus bear. And what has come of this discourse? And we'll talk a little bit more about, I'll give you all space to kind of explain what that discourse is even about. But what I'm so often hearing as the response to this meme is this like level of rejection that people are feeling, specifically like cis men, in this idea that like that women would feel safer with a bear than a man. And at the root of that, it sounds a lot like that rejection piece that we really are not talking about. We're really not like building skills to understand like how we're responsible for the ways that we can make other people feel. So I would be so interested, firstly, for you all to kind of give like the like 1 minute breakdown of like what is the whole thing about man versus bear, and then we can jump in a little bit deeper.
I honestly don't even know where it originated. Like where the first like video or like post was. I just saw it on TikTok one day and I was like, "Oh." And then like it just kept popping up. I was like sharing their experiences like I'd feel safer with a bear because I know that what the bear will do. I don't know what a man will do. Whoa, whoa. Like I've just seen all of these, but do you know, Essie, like where it actually started? Or like how it actually started?
I do not use TikTok. I use Instagram. And as we all know, people who only use Instagram are about 2 weeks late on every single trend. So I actually first heard it in person, talking to my friends. And I do know it hit like national news and stuff just because of how crazy it is. Basically, it started out by asking, like, would you rather be alone in the woods with a bear or a man? And what should be a really obvious, I don't want to be alone in the woods with a bear. That's terrifying, right? It turned into a really big discussion where women were sharing that they would rather be in the woods with a bear, and that really shocked a lot of people. It's caused a lot of thinking in me, and also like I've seen a lot of women saying like, well, the worst thing a bear can do is kill me. And also if the bear kills me, it's doing it for natural reasons, like to protect its babies. Like that's the natural cycle of life, right? Being attacked by one of your own species is not. And I saw men saying things like, well, you should have chose me, or like, yeah, you were right to choose the bear. And then I've also seen dads being like, I didn't get it until someone told me like, well, would you rather your daughter be alone in the woods with a bear or a man? It's kind of like the Me Too movement. It's really intense. It's forcing people to see the issue. And I think everyone can relate to it because when you ask someone, would you rather be alone in the woods with a bear or a man? I feel like everybody goes, that's the red flag to me. It's not really about how a lot of women are saying they'd rather be with the bear. It's that it's fostering this kind of like, oh, I don't know thing.
Yeah. I feel like not even like just in like our own personal lives, how it like shows us so much about like the people we know around us, but also just like society, that it's kind of been a collective like, oh, I'd choose the bear versus like I'd choose the man. I feel like it just says so much, and I feel like it just shows how huge of a problem sexual violence really is, like, in our society. And I just really kind of hope it kind of keeps sparking that larger conversation, because all the conversations I've been hearing, and like everyone kind of back reflecting, like, oh, this is like a big thing. Like, a lot of people would choose a man, because I feel like at first it, like, I don't really know how it originated, but like I feel like hypothetical questions that are always online are never actually serious, and this one just turned so serious so quickly, which is not bad at all. I'm so glad it did. But I really hope that it kind of shines light on how big of a problem this actually is in society, because I know it definitely made me kind of reflect on that.
And so do you all think, because I'm pulling on some of the strings of like what you all talked about earlier around like rape culture being such an issue with your generation, like, and then also Willow, you bringing up like bystander intervention, something that I've seen a lot and wonder if this is reflective of why people keep choosing, especially like women choosing the bear over a man, is that it's not just about like not knowing what a man might do to you in the woods, but also like if other men are around, are they going to intervene? And so, like, just thinking about too of like, is there going to be intervention there, or is somebody going to speak up? Because hearing back to what you're all saying is like education might be moving forward, but the culture isn't necessarily reflecting all of that. So I wonder, like, what do you think? And maybe that's not a part of it, but I wonder what you all think might be missing from the discourse while it is still sparking this really important conversation. What might be missing?
Yeah, totally. I find myself really wishing that we had a cisgender man to talk about this with, which is not a feeling that I feel often. So that tells you it's a good discussion, right? When we feel like we need the inclusivity of a cis man. I really would love to hear, because I can't put myself in those shoes, right? Because I don't know a lot of people, or any people, who I think would choose a bear over a woman. So I do really wish that we had somebody to kind of talk to about their feelings, but what I think is really missing is the why, I guess. Like, I think that women are kind of throwing it in men's faces almost, and being like, not like individuals, but as a whole, this trend is kind of being thrown in men's faces. It's like, yeah, women would choose a bear over you. Like, that's how bad it is. Like, that's how bad sexual violence is. And that, I do think that that is a good point, but I think that it's much more important for, I guess, potential perpetrators, because that could encompass a lot more people than just the statement men. Um, Potential perpetrators to understand why some individuals might feel more comfortable with a bear, and knowing that, like, there is that chance that we would be totally fine. Like, why do we feel like we're just going to choose the bear? Um, and I really think that that is such an individual thing too. And I do think it's something that also people who have been making this decision of like, who would I rather be with, is something for them to really reflect on and be like, why? And I think a lot of it is probably like, well, I've never had a bad experience with a bear. I know bears to be cute and fuzzy and sweet, right? I think I could get on this bear's side and everything would be fine. Like, I have much more confidence about my ability to convince a bear to be nice to me than I do my ability to do that with a man, especially one that I don't know. And I feel like what's missing from this conversation is that it's not about the individual. Like, I was talking to a man in my life about this, and he was saying, like, so you're saying you'd rather be alone in the woods with a bear than with me? And I'm like, no, but I don't know that it's you. I only know that it's a man who could potentially cause much more damage than a bear could ever even do. Or maybe it'd be totally fine. But I also would love to open the conversation up to, like, what are the men who we would feel good about being in the woods with? Just because I feel like we talk a lot about, like, yeah, this is sad, this is why women feel that way, and it's really intense and hard, but we don't give a lot of input on, like, this is how to be the kind of man who's preferable to a bear.
I think there's a few, or like, not like a few, like, there's obviously a lot of people who are really educated and like these topics, but I think education is moving forward in the sense that our generation has a lot of people who are passionate about this work and who are really educated about this work. But I think it's not moving forward in the fact that it's more societal education. I think that's really what's missing and what we're really lacking, like, as a society. And I feel like in this whole discourse, there's so much divide, especially between men who are getting hurt about women choosing the bear and kind of just women as a whole, that the people who need educated about this maybe a little more, it's just completely going over their head. And I think that's really what's missing, is how can we turn this into something that's gonna more widely educate versus just, like, we keep saying the word discourse, versus it just be discourse and it just be kind of an internet argument. And so I think that's really something big. Like, obviously all of us here are really educated on these topics and on this and really passionate about this, but maybe like in our communities and stuff, we could be like 1 out of 20. It's just, I think, a lack of education as a society versus as individuals, if that makes sense.
I'm so glad that you're bringing this all up. I wonder if zooming out, because what I'm hearing is that it's not necessarily about individuals, but about like the systems that are like reflecting the behaviors or like encouraging those behaviors. Like y'all brought up the patriarchy earlier. And so it's like, what do you think would be needed? Because like I'm hearing also a lot of education, but what I've also noticed is that education, at least in like my communities, hasn't changed behaviors, because skill building is like kind of the bridge, right? And like building those skills to intervene or building those skills to be a safe person to say no to are just not things that we always do. It's a lot of like, here's how you get and give consent, but there's no actual like practice or real life engagement in it. And so I wonder what you all think about like what needs to be addressed as far as like the patriarchy is concerned, so that like, and also like how we don't, like how shame is sometimes like stopping people from recognizing this is a like a cultural issue and not like a I'm not a bad guy, but rather like so I wonder what y'all think about that.
I just think that we really do need to dive into, like, as a society, how men and women are raised differently, because I I'm not trying to be polarizing or anything, and I'm not saying that one gender is, like, superior, but there are differences, and that's okay, and I feel like we do a lot of pushing away of those differences rather than embracing them, and I also think that a lot of sex education and a lot of sexual violence prevention education is led by women, right? And I don't know a lot of women who have had to learn how to be a comfortable person to say no to. I think that the way that girlfriend groups work from a very young age, I don't think that we've been taught to be offended by the word no as much as maybe young boys that grow into men have. And I also think that when you talk about teaching someone how to be a safe person, people are maybe like, I'm just saying, like, in the progressive realm of individuals, people are maybe like, no, 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 that's something that everybody should have. You're like, that's the bare minimum. We don't need to teach that. And I'm like, but we do. A good little analogy would be like speech therapy, right? So maybe not all kids need speech therapy, but some of them do. And it would be wrong to be like, no, everybody knows how to talk. Just don't. Like, that's not necessary. And not everybody knows how to be a safe person, and not everybody knows how to respond to the word no. But I think that everybody comes out of the womb wanting to be a safe person. And I think that we talk a lot about preventing violence through talking about just not being violent. We don't talk about how to present ourselves as safe. And I think that this really is something that is not taught to young boys in terms of someone feeling physically safe with them, because we don't want to give them this idea of you're not a physically safe person to be around. But I also think it could be beneficial to young girls with all their, like, teaching these elementary school kiddos, there is so much drama, and they're like, I don't feel comfortable talking to this friend because she's always rude. Whereas the boys are like, yeah, he's been hitting me, and I don't want to talk to him anymore. And I think that it's okay to say that we need to learn how to be good people without that being a critical statement of, oh, you're not good people. It's like nobody bats an eye when I show up to an elementary school and talk about being kind. But if you talk about learning how to receive a no, people are like, whoa. They should all know how to do that. And I think that it is just such a key element of prevention that we're not utilizing. So
I think kind of to go into like, why are people kind of focusing more on, well, I'm a safe person versus like societal level things, is I think it's like, as humans, it's just such instinct to take things more personally than they may be intended. Like in class, if someone's like, oh, whoever has those earbuds in, like, your music's really loud, like, first instinct is, oh my god, wait, is that my music? Like, is my music too loud? I think it's just a human instinct, like, oh, are they talking about me? Like, what if someone feels this way about me out there? And so I think it's paranoia, maybe not like paranoia, but like kind of that human instinct to like automatically take it personally and self-reflect is kind of distracting from the bigger picture, and how this isn't just like the problem of a few people. Like, obviously, if women, like, not even just like across America, but like really internationally, are discussing this and all coming to the same outcome, it's not just a few people in every country. It's obviously like a larger problem, which is where I really think that, like you were saying, Sarah, like the patriarchy comes in, and like, how can we really address that? And that's such a hard question, because like, how do we dismantle the patriarchy? People have been trying to answer that for literally like more than decades, like centuries. And it's taken us so long to even get here. And I think, like, honestly, is this even something we're ever going to see in our lifetimes? Probably not. Is it going to get better? Hopefully. um so yeah, I think it's just like kind of almost human nature to just kind of take things more personally than they're actually intended to be.
yeah. I also think that, like, if people are saying, like, not all men, like you were saying earlier, then I'm like, okay, if it's not all men, then why not take some steps to make yourself into somebody? And all those not all men's that you're talking about, why not support them in being safe people to be around? Because I think that a lot of times in conversations like this, women are kind of seen as like crazy, like, oh, you're crazy for choosing a bear. That's crazy. Oh, no. Like, it's like a lot of almost societal gaslighting of like, no, it's not all men. And you're like, enough of them have hurt me to the point where I feel this need to be cautious. I saw a really, really great analogy once where someone like had a bowl of 100 grapes, and they were like, okay, this grape is like a cyanide grape. Okay. And they put it in the bowl and they like mixed it all around. And they were like, okay, pick a grape. And they're like, well, you're not going to eat from that bowl, right? And I was like sitting there like, no, I'm not going to eat from that bowl. And they're like, well, it's only one who has cyanide, and now all of the ones that it's touched. But still, why aren't you taking a grape? Are you judging the grapes? And I was like, that is such a good point. I also think that it's worth analyzing our internal biases about too, like, because I do feel like sometimes we are quick to jump to conclusions about men, and that's something that I work to break down in myself. And sometimes I find myself wishing that I wish that, again, I'm speaking very generally here about men, but I do sometimes wish that men would put the same amount of effort into respecting me as I put energy into tolerating them. Because sometimes that is what it's about. Like, for survivors, it's like, this is hard, but you have to tolerate it. And I sometimes wish that we could just walk in each other's shoes a little bit better, and understand why men are hurt by this, and understand that it's not their fault that they're hurt by it, and all these things. And basically, people are not empathetic enough.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good moment to kind of reflect on, especially as like, how can the increase in empathy play a major role in how we shift from rape culture to, a consent culture, kind of bringing us full circle into consent not just being a thing we give and get, but rather a thing that we embody in our culture, and how it can combat kind of this us versus them, because we know the patriarchy hurts everyone and that we all have the ability to embody patriarchy. So, you know, I'm really reflecting on a lot of things that you all have said today, and would love to kind of also just point out, and I think this has come up more than once, is also like who we're leaving out of the conversation, knowing that this podcast is, going to be released in June for Pride Month, and thinking about really like the attacks on like queer and trans kids, especially youth, especially right now, and the increased levels of sexual violence. I wonder if either of you could provide like maybe a brief reflection on how some of this discourse leaves many people out of the conversation, and how we might be able to shift things a little bit.
I think that it's really difficult for me to kind of provide a perspective or like feedback on that, because I'm like a straight white cis woman. But I definitely like do see a lot, like, I mean, even like just in this conversation, we've literally been saying the words men and women. Like, we've been generalizing it to that, when it's so much more. Like, there's so many other people who have been in this conversation. There's trans women, there's people who are non-binary, there's trans men. Like, there's so many different people who have been involved in this conversation, and I think that is something for us to recognize. But I don't want to say something wrong per se, especially because I don't really fall under any of those categories. So I don't know if Essie can speak more on that, or
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to speak on it a little bit. Again, we don't have a variety of races represented in this group. Um, but I was talking to Sarah the other day, and she said something interesting about the bear versus man thing, that a bear would not, like, be more violent towards a black woman just because she was black, whereas a human being might. And so I do think that it's really important to analyze like our own experiences when talking about empathy, especially because I might feel more comfortable with the bear, right? But I like, if I pass a man in the woods, I don't immediately start freaking out, probably because I carry a taser when I'm alone in the woods, and because I live in Athens, Ohio. um, where it's all like, bikers and hikers. Not a lot of super bad violence around here. Thinking about like the families, not the university. But since you were talking about June, I do think that I can speak for the queer community a little bit. I am a cisgender woman, but I am queer. And I do have a sibling who questions their gender identity, so it all feels very personal to me, all of the trans rights issues. And I definitely see how it disproportionately affects people because sexual violence is a form of power over people. And I think that people want power over those who they view as less than them. And I think that that sort of less than mindset is very commonly attributed to queer people and people of other races and just minorities in general. And I think that as a person, as a woman who only dates women, I find that dating is never as scary for me as it is for my straight friends. So I almost think of it as a privilege. For the most part, like, it's always shocking to me hearing about my straight friends, and like, I never worry about sharing my location when I'm on a date, but my friends do. And I have friends who go to OU who are really nervous about sexual violence, and I think that it really is just that empathy piece and understanding that no matter if you share all the identities with somebody else, like if I'm talking to another white, cisgender, lesbian woman living in Appalachian, Ohio, we still don't have the same life experience. So I think that there are times when it's good to talk about minorities and how they are disproportionately affected. But I also think that, it's all about somebody's personal life, and we just can't know why someone might choose the bear over the man or the man over the bear. Like if my mom had gotten brutally attacked by a bear when I was 5, I'm choosing the man, right? But that's not what's happened to me. But I did see someone in the comment section say that. They were like, I would definitely choose the man because my mom got attacked by a bear. And I was like, so justified, right? Like, that's crazy. So I just think that as much as it is helpful to look at these boxes of individuals and like how the world looks at them, it's also important to remember that everybody's experiences are their own. But that's just my 2 cents. Again, I'm still a white cisgender woman. All right? Here's what we need on this podcast. We need a Black woman, we need a trans woman, we need a trans man, we need a cis man, and we need all these people in like different races from different areas. We can just have a conference, a bear versus man conference.
So I'm so grateful to everything that y'all are bringing up and really kind of bringing us into so many different nuances of this conversation. And I think where a good place where we could wrap up is from your perspectives, especially thinking about all the things we've talked about today, what we're missing in the consent conversation, what it takes to truly prevent sexual violence, and then also like this discourse, right? Like, how do we keep the discourse not a moment but a movement? So like what would be each of what would you say would be the priority, maybe like 2 to 3 priority actions that could help us move discourse into actual like prevention?
I'm a big bystander intervention gal. So I think really just Googling even really quickly, what is bystander intervention? How can I kind of incorporate that into my daily life? And maybe just starting by, you hear someone in the hall, so you say something. Just something small, like in your everyday, day-to-day life.
I also think it's about social media being not always the best. Like obviously social media and the internet is really, really great for activism sometimes and being able to band groups of people together like we never could have without social media. But I also think that I had to put my phone down at some point watching all these bear versus man things. And I had to go and I had to talk to people in my life about how they were feeling because as much as everyone's opinions do matter, what someone halfway across the country is thinking about the bear versus man thing does not affect me. What my mom is thinking about it, what my stepdad is thinking about it, what my sister is thinking about it, those affect me. And I think that it's really about taking a step back and not being as reactive. And I understand that people have different personality types and some people are more reactive and some people aren't. So it might be easier for some than others. But I do think it's really key to just, when you see something shocking like bear versus man, put the phone down and talk to real people and try to understand. I think it's about coming from empathy and having an interest in understanding. Because, like how I was saying, we need a cis man to talk to us about this. I want to understand how this is affecting men. Because obviously, that's not the voice that I feel like needs amplified in this situation, but it is a voice that I don't have. So I feel like I need to hear that. And I also like to hear from like queer men who have had bad experiences in relationships with men. And I want to hear from trans women, and I want to hear from trans men. And I feel like with any like statement like this, like bear versus man, that really is causing this much discourse, it's important to think about our own perspectives and our own limitations. And again, I just think it's all about that empathy standpoint, because people don't come out of the womb wanting to hurt others. And I think that it's really important to just not get angry right off the bat and just understand that everyone has their own reasons for why they do the things they do and the reasons they say the things they do. And I'm not saying don't be hurt by it, because things can be hurtful. But I do think that it would be good if we could all just understand that everyone thinks the way they do for a reason, and sometimes we need to look at that reason rather than just what they're saying.
It's not just what our responses or reactions are to the discourse, but what we actually do with it that can be the big change. So I am just like so grateful that we were able to have this conversation today, and hopefully that folks are walking away understanding some like actions that they can take or reflections that they can sit with. And so kind of to wrap today, just a shameless plug that folks can follow all the Be the One content on Instagram at Be the One Ohio. And you can also catch all of our youth ambassadors all across Ohio. We're slowly but surely like mobilizing it all. Are there any things that you all wanted to lift up as part of the project, or any shout outs before we head out today?
I think our Instagram is a really, really great place to be. There are 6 of us. We're still working on kind of getting some of that content out to you guys, but I would definitely recommend following that. And there are more exciting things to come. Right now we just have like regular posts with us, but we're going to look into getting into reels. We might get into some merch, maybe some poster campaigns. So it's pretty fun. And your follow takes like 5 seconds, and it means a lot to us. So we would really, really love a follow, maybe a couple likes. A comment would go crazy. But yeah, we have a good time. So it's not like all like super serious. It's pretty fun. Yeah, and we're all like super fun. So I mean, I might be a little bit biased because I do love talking about this stuff more than the average person. It's definitely fun.
And if you just like loved me and Essie, then you're gonna love the other 4 of us. So hit that little follow.
Amazing. Y'all are the best. And I believe that a future without violence is possible because y'all are the jam. So with that, we're going to peace out. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Thanks for listening to Teal Talk. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into intersectional issues affecting survivors in Ohio. If you like what you heard, subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review, recommend us to a friend, and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at OAESV and Twitter at Ohio Alliance ESV. If you'd like to learn more about us and the services we offer, sign up for our email list, or read a transcript of this episode, visit oaesv.org.
Want to share a comment or ask a question for a future episode? Just click on the link in the show notes to leave us a voicemail. And remember, we're here to help. Feel free to call our resource line at 888-886-8388 during regular business hours, or the Ohio Sexual Violence Helpline 24/7 at 844-644-6435. See you next time.